Hey everybody, how you doing? This is about to be a really fun video. One of the most common questions I get from you guys is, hey, I'm just getting started into hunting. What caliber should I get? Or, hey, what's one of your favorite cartridges for whitetail? In this video, we are going to talk about the two most underrated cartridges for deer hunting, meaning fantastic cartridges that not many people have, and I don't know a single other person that hunts with them. So, check it out. One is a short action, one is a long action. I'm going to show you an example of them both right here. Short action is the short one, long action is the long one. Do you have an idea? Some of y'all might have guessed just from the thumbnail. So here's what we're talking about, guys. The 7mm 08 and the 25-06. Let's dig a little bit deeper, talk about them both. I'm going to show you some footage of me hunting with both of these, and then we're going to nerd out on a little bit of data, and I'm going to show you the facts on why these are awesome, and I think a whole lot more people should be choosing these when they're going to pick a hunting cartridge. Check it out. All right, so first, let's talk about the short action. Like I said, super underrated is the 7mm 08. What is the 7mm 08? Well, it is a 308 Winchester case necked down to accept a 7mm projectile, or a .284 projectile. Everybody knows, that's pretty common knowledge out there. 7mm is a fantastic bullet. It has incredible ballistics. It is super flat, whether it's in a 7mm 08, a 7mm mag, a 7 PRC. People love 7mm because it's super flat. Originally, the 7mm 08 was started as a wildcat cartridge where people were doing just that, necking down 308 cases to 7mm, until in 1980, Remington coined the term 7mm 08 Remington as an official cartridge. So 1980 was when Remington came up with the 7mm 08 Remington. Says it here right on the box. Check it out. 7mm 08 Remington. How many of you did not know that that was a Remington cartridge? What grain weight is 7mm 08? Well, you typically see it between 120 grain and 160 grain. So what else is like that? 308, 30-06. So at the end of this video, I'm going to compare both of these to 308 and 30-06, and I'm going to show you drop rates and energy at different yardages and show you why both of these are awesome. But like I said, 7mm 08, generally speaking, you find them in factory loads between 120 grain to 160 grain. A lot of the loadings, the sweet spot is 140 grain. So that is what Remington core locked loads, is their 7mm 08 core locked in a 140 grain projectile. We're going to do some comparisons there here in a second. But let me roll in some footage here of me personally taking a whitetail here in Tennessee with this very ammo, Remington core locked, 7mm 08, 140 grain. This is about 130, 135 yards. So, nobody's going to argue with me on that, huh? 130 yards or so, dropped the whitetail right where it stood. Now, let's talk about the other one, the long action. This is the 25-06 Remington. Same thing. How many of y'all did not know that 25-06 was actually 25-06 Remington? We're going to compare the core lock ballistics on this as well. 25-06, woo! Wait till you see the numbers. Like I'm telling you, Both of these are super underrated. We talked about how the 7mm 08 is a 308 neck down to a 7mm. Well, sort of in the same fashion, the 25-06 is a 30-06 case neck down to accept a 25 caliber projectile or a 257 caliber projectile. Now, what grain weights do we typically see? 25-06, well, with that 25 caliber bullet, between 80 grain and up to 120 grain. So the 25-06, more case capacity, but a smaller projectile in the 80 grain up to the 120 grain. The sweet spot where you typically see all the hunting loadings is either a 120, like this Remington core locked. This is 120 grain, or a 117 grain. Remington also loads a 100 grain core locked, and we're going to look at some of those numbers here on the charts here in just a second. But in a similar fashion, this 25-06 was a Wildcat cartridge until I got to look it up here. 1969. I did not know the year on that until I looked it up for this video. But 1969 is when that 25-06 officially came out from Remington as the 25-06 Remington. I've also taken animals with the 25-06. Let me roll in some footage using this exact same loading as well, the 120 grain Remington core locked. I took a pronghorn in Colorado last year. This is a 250 yard poke. Check out this footage. Popped up on the fence. Colin ranged them at 250. I dialed that baby and let that Remington core lock sing. So, nobody's going to argue with me on that. 250 yards, that's actually the furthest I've ever taken an animal with that. 25-06 was a fantastic selection, and we're about to show you in the numbers why I picked that cartridge for that pronghorn hunt when I knew we were going to be possibly stretching it a little bit further. Alright, so let's look at the numbers. Like I said, 7mm 08 is a 308 case. 25-06 is a 30-06 case. So let's compare both of these, the 140 grain core locked 7mm 08, 120 grain 25-06 Remington core locked, and let's compare them to some common loadings in the same loadings, the Remington core locked against the 308 and the 30-06 as well. Let's hit the charts. If you look at these numbers, what I've done is green means good. This first one we're looking at is the drop chart numbers. All of this is in inches. Green means good, meaning it doesn't drop very much. Red means it drops a ton, a lot faster than the others. So right off the bat, what are the three green lines? Or the good lines? Or what drops the least? 7mm 08 and the two different 25-06 loadings in Remington core lock, the 120 and the 100 grain. Now on these charts, we're comparing it against the 150 grain and the 180 grain core locks, both for the 308 and the 30-06. Most commonly stuff out there. A bunch of you guys probably have some of this on your shelf. So let's look at the 200 yard column. What wins? The 100 grain core locked 25-06 only drops 2.7 inches at 200 yards. What's number two? The 120 grain core locked 25-06. It only drops 3.2 inches at 200 yards. Third place is a tie between 30-06 150 grain and the 140 grain 7mm 08. Let's go on to 300 yards. Looks like almost the exact same order. 100 grain 25-06, then the 120 grain 25-06. Third place 7mm 08 is starting to take over that light 30-06 load. The 7mm 08 only drops 13.2, and then the 30-06 starts to drop faster. Go on out to 500 yards. It's the same story across the board, guys. The 25-06 drops much less than the 30-06, its parent case. It drops much less than the 308, and it beats out the 7mm 08. So when we talk about drop at varying distances, now that's the part B of a lot of people's questions when they ask me, what should I get for a hunting round? I want something that's real flat. I don't want to have to do clicks when I'm hunting. I don't want to have to fool with a lot of holdover. What's something that's flat? Look at this chart, guys. 25-06 is flat, and it's awesome. Let's just show up the picture real quick, guys. Pop up the picture, all this stuff. Pretty picture, right? It's easier to see with your eyeballs than numbers. Well, looking at this picture and the numbers, out to 400 yards, not really a huge difference. But when you're hunting 300 yards, 400 yards, hey, a difference of 3 inches or 4 inches could be huge in a matter of you taking home some antlers or you eating your tag. Go on out to 1,000. Those top 3 lines, the green one, the blue one, and the orange one, that's the 2 25-06 loads and the 7mm 08 loads. So a lot of people say, oh, I like to take my 308 out to 1,000 yards. Well, hey, 25-06 and a 7mm 08 is a much better option at 1,000 yards, a whole lot less drop. Just showing you here on the picture. So now you might be thinking, well, it might drop less, but that's a much lighter bullet, so it probably doesn't have as much energy, and that's why I want to poo-poo on your 7mm 08 and 25-06. There is a little bit of logic to that, but not quite as much as you might think. The 7mm 08 is 140 grain. That's pretty close to the pretty standard 150 grain for the 308. That being said, let's do the same discussion, but talk about energy this time instead of drop. So exact same numbers, exact same format. Green means good. In this case, the most energy in each column is green, and the least amount of energy is red. So the one that dropped the least was the lightest 100 grain. From an energy perspective, that is the one that is bright red across the board. So that one is the lightest, it drops the least, but it also has the least amount of energy. Which one has the most energy? Well, let's start at 100 yards. 30-06, 180 grain, then the 180 grain 308, and the 150 grain 30-06. So 100 yards, 308, and the 30-06 one, from an energy perspective. Then we go on out to about 400 yards, 500 yards really, is when we start to lose enough energy for chasing deers. A lot of people prescribe to that, oh, you got to have at least 1,000 yards or 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to take a deer. I don't know who came up with that, somebody a long time ago, but that's some of that FUD lore that people like to quote to me. You need to have 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to take a deer. Well, if we think about it like that, prescribe to that FUD lore there, 500 yards, 7mm 08 still has enough energy. So does the 308, 180 grain. But look, the 308 150 grain, the 25-06s both don't have enough energy at 500 yards. Neither does the 150 grain 30-06. So from an energy perspective, at 500 yards, the 7mm 08 has more energy than most 308 loads, and it has more energy than 150 grain 30-06. Pretty interesting. Let me say that again. At 500 yards, the 7mm 08 140 grain core locked has more energy than 150 grain 30-06. That's just some of that ballistic stuff that's hard to understand unless you sit here and look at it a whole bunch. Anyways, 7mm 08, it's got the energy. If you want to poo-poo on 25-06, I don't like those little bitty bullets. Well, 7mm 08 in the short action has plenty of energy. out to 500 yards if you prescribe to that 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. But that being said, I don't know anybody that hunts at 500 yards. I don't recommend it to anybody. Like I said, the furthest I've taken an animal is that pronghorn at 250 yards. So if we look at this chart, with that 120 grainer I used, I was still hitting that pronghorn at 250 yards with, we'll call it 1,500 foot-pounds of energy. 1,500 is plenty. You saw it. Most people would say that's enough energy to take an elk. So, just showing you guys the numbers. I'll pop up the picture here too. Sometimes people like pictures better than the numbers. From an energy perspective, the very light 100 grain 25-06 is the lowest in the energy when we're comparing all of these. And the highest energy is the 180 grain 30-06. Now that being said, let's take a look at that red line again. Red means bad. Doesn't necessarily mean bad though. That just means it's the worst in that column. So if we still prescribe to the you need 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to take a deer, well, where do we run out of steam? Roughly 350 yards, even with that 100 grain 25-06. So you're still good to 350 yards using that 100 grainer. All that being said, guys, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of the 7mm 08 and the 25-06? Like I said, in my opinion, in my perspective, these are the two most underrated hunting cartridges out there. Both of them are very flat. Both of them carry plenty of energy. And I've taken deer and pronghorn with both of these with great success. Immediate drops. Something to think about. Everyone wants to go grab a 308. I kind of like to be weird. I have taken a deer with a 308. Let me roll in some footage of that. Big old fallow deer. Took that deer with the 308. I've also taken a red stag with the 30-06. Let's roll in that footage.
Hit him. Hit him. He's running. He's running. I'm still on him.
Okay, stay on him.
He's gonna fall down. He's gonna fall down. I'm on him still.
He went down.
Yes!
So, I'm not trying to poo-poo on your 308 or your 30-06. I just kind of like to be weird. But, as you saw on the charts, 7mm 08 and 25-06 have plenty of energy for taking deer or pronghorn out to ranges of 3, 4, even 500 yards, depending on which loading that you pick. But, hey, appreciate you guys watching. What else is an underrated cartridge in your opinion? Comment down below. I always want to hear what you guys think. Appreciate y'all watching. Maybe for your next hunting rig, consider a 7mm 08 or a 25-06. Appreciate y'all watching. We'll see you on the next one. Woo-hoo!